Thank you everybody for joining today. We are here to talk about innovation and how innovation can be used, especially at this time to boost business. Sorry, technical difficulties. I've lost my notes. All right, we're back. We've got some great speakers here this morning, and I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion. Let's just get going, and if anyone else is going to turn up, then I'll just have to catch. So to chat to you all today, we have Cameron Owens, CEO of Radium Capital. We also have Lauren Barber, who is founder of MedTech at NeedleCalm. We have James Graham, Executive Director of Reese Pharmaceuticals, Brett Saville, who is CEO of Quantify Technology, and Melanie Wise. Am I pronouncing that right?
Weiss,
sorry. Who's Head of Strategy at Meerkats. So they're all going to do a much better job of explaining what they do than I'll be able to. So I might just ask you one by one just to introduce yourself and give us a sense of what it is that you do. So shall we start with you, Cameron?
Absolutely. Cameron Owens is my name. I'm CEO at Radium Capital. Also an investor and founder of startups as well. In terms of Radium Capital, we're an R&D finance business, and what we do is basically offer startups and businesses the ability to get an early payment on their R&D tax refund. And as you can imagine, we're pretty busy at this time. So that's me, and thank you.
Great, thank you. Should we come to you next, Lauren?
Yep. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us, Steph. So my name's Lauren Barber. I'm the founder and CEO of NeedleCalm. I'm a registered nurse, and I've been nursing for just over 10 years now. I set up NeedleCalm approximately just over 4 years ago because I found there was a huge problem with people having a needle phobia and healthcare avoidance. So we've got a class 1 medical device that's coming out onto the market shortly. So I've been very busy getting that ready at the moment. So, yep, thank you.
Great, thank you. And Brett, should we come to you next?
Good morning. Yes, so I'm the CEO of an ASX-listed small-cap business called Quantify Technology. We make a range of smart home devices that sync automatically with Google and Amazon Alexa in order to automate your home.
Awesome, thank you. And Melanie?
Hi, my name is Melanie Weiss. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Meerkats. We're a creative marketing consultancy, and we specialise in product and service design, advertising and brand purpose. So we help brands orientate around what it is they're in the world to help change and line up their employees, their product and service suite and their communications around that purpose.
Awesome. And last but not least, James.
Hi, I'm James Graham, co-founder and executive director of Recce Pharmaceuticals. We're an ASX-listed company advancing the first new class of antibiotics in over 30 years. Our antibiotics are broad spectrum by way of nature, but with the primary focus on septicemia or blood poisoning. And to my knowledge, we're the only company in the world with a FDA qualified infectious disease designation, supporting that claim and facilitating our path forwards.
Awesome, thank you. And for anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Steph. I'm the Startups and Technology Editor here at Smart Company. It's obviously been a really interesting time to be sort of covering this space, and sort of we'll get onto some of the reasons why. But just for a little bit of housekeeping, we have a Q&A function here. If any of the audience members would like to ask a question, it would be really helpful if you can ask through the Q&A function rather than through the chat, as that just makes it a little bit easier for us to moderate. Also, while I'm sure you'll all be furiously taking notes, we will be sharing this video with everybody later. So if you miss something, then there will be an opportunity for you to ask us questions at a later date, and also to go back and rewatch the panel. So great, let's get started. It's obviously not news to anyone that we're in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic, which is obviously brought about not only a health crisis, but this significant economic and financial challenge too. We know that cash flow and capital are under more pressure than we've maybe ever seen before. The situation is changing constantly, and a lot of businesses and startups and entrepreneurs are in completely uncharted territory and in a completely unprecedented situation that nobody could have predicted a few months ago. So being a business journalist, and especially one working in the tech space, has been really interesting at this time. And we've heard some really sort of heartbreaking and difficult stories, but we're also hearing these like sort of amazing and inspiring stories of businesses that are pivoting into new spaces, switching up their offerings, and just like innovating to meet the demands of this new environment. And just being able to be nimble and to innovate in that way has allowed some of these businesses to keep their heads above water. So first of all, innovation is a word that we all sort of throw around a lot, and I know that I'm guilty of this as well. But today I just want to sort of try and unpick what that word means, and particularly why it's so important to innovate now. We're going to be looking at some of the barriers to innovation and also thinking about how we can overcome those barriers. But first of all, you're all in very different spaces, so I'm interested to hear what innovation means to each of you and sort of how you're implementing it at the moment. So first of all, I might come to you first, Lauren. What is innovation for you and for your business, and how have you responded to the COVID-19 crisis at Needlecalm?
Thanks, Steph. It's a difficult question. I think innovation has taken on a very different meaning for myself, Needlecalm, and a lot of other businesses lately. You know, I think we've got a great product that's coming out onto the market, but for innovation right now, it's just survival for us at the moment. We've just found ourselves in mostly a financial situation that no one expected. I have had to just, unpick every part of the business to try and save money. It's been, like my financial situation, I haven't paid myself for a lot of things, and just trying to talk to people, or how we've responded is just trying to get help from people to try and rectify their financial situation and give us a few more months of runway, because we are quite close to the market. So companies like Radium have been quite helpful in trying to manage that, because it's just for us, a matter of being smart and surviving at the moment and trying to make your money work better for you. So yes, tricky, but I think it's just been mostly about getting help and admitting that you're not in the best space that you could be at the moment. So
yeah. And James, you're also sort of working in the medical space. I understand that you're sort of going a little bit hard on R&D at the moment. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I'm sorry to hear of Lauren's position there. It sounds a difficult time in her business. And without seeking to offend, of course, as an infectious disease business, which we always have been, and I believe we always will be, not only is it business as usual, but this is just the perfect storm. You've got increased recognition of the need of new medicine, fast adoption of new medical principles and recognition of the value of that new medicine, but a lot of warm tailwinds to facilitate both regulatory development, but the capital runway required to go forwards. So, I feel almost daily market incentives in our space being, if I call it an anti-infective space, both antibacterials, but also antivirals, and the two working synergistically together, is just a great space to be a part of. So by example, thinking of innovatively, and cash solutions, particularly in seeking to extend the financial runway. We raised around $7 million a few months ago. In true cash runway, it's about $10 million of real spend, given 76% of our expenditure is R&D applicable based on last financial year. And just at this moment, I guess, from an operational perspective, a huge portion of our R&D is done overseas. The technology was identified here in Australia. We've made the breakthrough, and then it's about doing that repetitive, regulatory orientated type work by skilled people in places, unfortunately, that are outside of Australia, and particularly the US. So right at this moment, we are again submitting to the government for what's called an advanced finding, which is extending our Australian R&D to include overseas R&D. So we get that 43.5% R&D rebate, non-dilutionary, caveat-free, you don't need to pay it back, extended overseas. So that gives us, which I think we already have, but added layer of financial security going forwards, and really allows us to bank our variable cost activities, which is R&D, going forwards. And what a I shouldn't say beautiful landscape to be in, being the crisis and turmoil that COVID is presenting, but what an opportune time to hopefully see these breakthroughs come through to the clinic, and hopefully change modern medicine and re-empower clinicians as a whole.
And so those R&D activities that you're talking about, like how sort of important is it? Like how much of that is down to sort of the funding behind it?
We certainly don't spend a dollar to get 43.5 cents back. It's not a financial goal. But what it does do is it does allow us to extend our runway. So in years gone by, sometimes we've gone to second providers and said, look, we can raise capital now. It'll come at, say, a 20% discount to current trade. What do we do? Do we think by taking a short-term loan, caveat-free, only tied to the future R&D from the government, we can not only boost our share price, but deliver on more objectives related to boosting that share price, and come in at a higher capitalisation with a higher trade turnover of our stock in the background. So for us as a business, we've incorporated that strategy probably 3 times over the last couple of years. We went from $10 million to around $65, $70 million a couple of months ago, by example. One was, we took on an R&D rebate or an R&D loan at around a 14-cent share price. A few months later, we did our placement of, a few million dollars at about 20 cents. So to really extend that capital runway, work to what your operational goals are, which we obviously seek to know and seek to build comfort around the ability to deliver those. It works as a good capital solution. You've got to think differently. You can't, knocking on your neighbour's door and saying, how about another check for $10,000 only works a couple of times. You can't keep doing it.
Yeah. And I'm just going to come to Brett now. I hear that you're sort of going pretty hard on R&D at the minute as well. Like, why is it that that's sort of so important to you at the moment?
Sure. Smart home automation is something that's been around for about 20 years. And it's always, for 20 years, held out an enormous promise, a promise to help individuals reduce their energy bill, to lower their costs through reduction in preventive maintenance and break-fix maintenance, allows you to personalize your living and therefore have a more pleasant experience at home, and finally to make it safer through CCTV and so forth. That promise has been largely undelivered because the solutions that are in the market are too complex and too costly, really ever to reach a mass market. And so innovation means to us is that we see ourselves as part of a process to transform that market to provide truly mass market products in the smart home automation space. So if you think about your car 20 years ago, your car was pretty dumb. Now cars have anti-locking brakes, they have collision avoidance, they have airbags. You wouldn't actually buy a car without those things nowadays. And it's the same with the phone. The phone, up until the iPhone, were all pretty clunky. So I suppose our pitch is very much, if your car is smart, if your phone is smart, then your home should be smart as well. In terms of the second question, which is about what happens during this crisis for us, I think very much in line with the two prior speakers, we clearly need to be very careful about cash. So we were lucky in that we raised capital at the end of last year, so we have enough cash to be going. But obviously our forecasts are kind of out the window at the moment. And so we need to ensure that we preserve that cash whilst we wait for the market to pick up again. So going back to every one of those line items that you mentioned, Lauren, and just make sure that you really absolutely do need to spend that money now. Similarly with the team, we've gone from a 5-day week down to a 4-day week, and a couple of the guys are furloughed at the moment. So we've tried to do that. The second area that we focused on is very much, are there quick wins that we can achieve? And for us, we've integrated with one of the major players called Control4, which is one of the largest automating businesses in the world. This opens up a new market to us. So we've tried very hard to deliver on those short-term goals. And then I think the third thing is to say, if the market has changed because of this pandemic, does that actually open up opportunities for us? And whilst we're not as directly involved in the medical side of things, one of the interesting things about smart home automation is that you have switches, power points, light dimmers and so forth that you don't need to touch. If you think about an NDIS or disability living, or if you think about aged care, these are locations where you have carers, residents, loved ones, all coming and going on a daily basis, and therefore raising the risk of infection. So the ability to be able to have some type of automation which reduces the need to touch devices does help manage some of the risk of infection in those locations. So I wouldn't say it's a complete pivot, but we've certainly put a lot more effort and energy into those markets since we've seen that there's an enormous demand to try and respond to this crisis in a way that makes sense for the residents and for the carers who are living in these locations.
It's really interesting. So for you, Cameron, Radium is obviously sort of very much ingrained in the R&D space. Are you seeing any sort of trends in the kind of innovations that businesses are working on? And also, have you seen sort of an increase in demand for your services?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing two main trends. The first is in the manufacturing sector. Just some interesting examples. A local homegrown fashion label in Victoria by Kinsman, interestingly enough, are now making reusable masks for the fashion forward clients. So that's like an interesting evolution of their business. Then a South Australian business called Det Mould Group and a Victorian business called Textile. Now they've pivoted their businesses to make medical face masks for Australian healthcare workers. So again, that's a really interesting pivot for them. And of course, there's been a lot of coverage of gin distilleries now sort of moving into the hand sanitisation business, which again is a really interesting pivot and evolution of their business. And then if you look at sort of at a global level, massive brands of businesses like Dyson, General Motors, Tesla, all of a sudden they're in the ventilation business, responding to a really important issue that we're all facing at a global level. So it's just so those pivots have been really, really interesting in how people are responding to new opportunities. But more directly into our business, what we're seeing is that people are absolutely looking to gravitate to alternative forms of capital to most importantly just strengthen their balance sheet, just really help them continue to invest in R&D and just ensure that they've just got the balance sheet strength to just sort of punch through these more complex times. So that's definitely sort of one of the trends that we're seeing. And I think the second part of your question, why is it sort of happening? The reason why it's happening is that some of the more traditional forms of capital or finance are not available as they once were. So be it an angel investment, angel investor, VC, banks, that sort of capital is less available than it once was.
Mm. Yeah, that's a trend that sort of we've been noticing as well. And just finally for you, Mel, what are you seeing among sort of the businesses that you work with? Do you sort of find that innovation means sort of different things to different businesses, and sort of how are clients responding?
Yeah, it absolutely means different things. I mean, I think obviously in the kind of technical R&D space that a number of these businesses and Radium operate in, there is an ATO definition of what is and is not innovation. But I think fundamentally taking a more creative and more nimble approach to your business is creating innovation, and the current times certainly call for that. I think ultimately for us, it's about an increased customer focus, about really intimately understanding what your customer base needs and breaking your business down into its component parts and figuring out what the individual elements of your business could do to better service that need, whether it's an emerging need or a constant one that you've not previously addressed. So starting with the customer for us is really important. And secondly, starting with your business purpose, figuring out what you're in the business of doing, what in the world you want to ease or solve, or finding your why. And then making sure that your innovation stream lines up against that. Because I think it's all very well to kind of chase COVID down the rabbit hole, but you may end up in a business stream that you're neither equipped nor passionate to service in the longer term. So making sure that you end up with innovations that you honestly want to pursue and can do to the best of your customers' need base is really important. Obviously, we're seeing tech adoption across the board. But I think that was almost the first 2 or 3 weeks of the COVID crisis, or the first 2 or 3 weeks of home isolation. The kind of need to move from cope to hustle is how we're talking about it, has seen the rapid adoption of technology through businesses, but that's now not enough. Just being online or being present or getting your business's website up and running and taking orders online isn't enough. Now you actually have to better cater to emerging customer needs. So, but we are seeing clients do that really effectively. Brown's Dairy, who's the biggest local dairy producer in Western Australia, started doing home deliveries again, which they haven't done since the early 80s. So, you know, put the dairy on a truck and took orders via Facebook and got their Shopify up and running in the first 2 weeks. And that's been unbelievably successful from them, from a branding and customer relations point of view, and also driven increased volume. We've seen utilities, we have a lot of utility clients, and they're all in the hardship and support space, both for small business and for individuals, because obviously there are a lot of families and a lot of businesses that need more time and need to make their money work harder. So utilities are doing a really good job getting communications to the market effectively. Synergy, who's the government energy supplier in WA, we still have an energy monopoly for residential clients here, has done an amazing job with business and personal hardship grants, and helping them communicate that effectively to the marketplace has been a big chunk of work for us. We've got nursing homes that are embracing technology for elderly parents to connect them to their grandchildren and their children, and do, you know, buddy programs with primary schools. Oh, my lights have just gone out. And we've also seen St John Ambulance here in WA, who's a client of ours, offer digital first aid training and app-based first aid training and really ramp up their capability in that space, to be able to make you more resilient at home and you know, ideally have you go to the GP less or only for urgent cases where you want to stay out of care facilities. So there are some clients doing amazing things, but using the combination of technology and audience knowledge to pivot around their existing capability.
Awesome. So just before I move on to my next question, we do have a poll to launch. I just need to so I believe the poll should be live now. You should all be able to see it. Maybe. It's just going to be running in the background. So it's just a couple of little questions to get a sense of sort of how both the panelists and the audience are feeling. If you have a chance just to answer those quick questions, that'd be great. And in the meantime, we'll come back to the poll at the end. But yeah, in the meantime, as you mentioned, Lauren, like this is a difficult time for a lot of businesses. And like I said at the beginning, like we've spoken to some entrepreneurs who are having a really difficult situation and sort of trying to find the way through that. And like you mentioned, it's important to sort of know why you're spending every dollar that you're spending and know what the like return on that dollar is going to be. So at this time, do you think it's important to invest both money but also like time and energy into innovation projects and R&D, and like what are the opportunities here?
I think for us, our trajectory hasn't changed just because we're so close to market release. You know, all of the R&D spend has been planned for such a long time. There's other costs that obviously I could consider, you know, cutting down staff. You know, I run off nothing anyway out of a home office, and it's kind of fairly easy to manage things like that. But I think it's probably more important to kind of keep my team together, because if I did fire someone, then it would take, you know, another 6 months to find someone else, retrain them. By that time, like there's kind of a lot of time and effort wasted. At the moment, you know, I work 16-hour days as it is. I just don't have that time anymore. So like, yes, I could save a few $1,000s by getting rid of my staff, but long term it'd end up costing 2 or 3 times that much to keep them on. And I think I agree with a lot of Melanie's points now. We're over that hurdle and it's just time to get back on track and just keep hustling. You know, a lot of us are in the same position, but I just haven't, apart from the financial situation, the structure of the business hasn't changed. We've just done a little fundraise for the last bit of money to get us to market, and I think the R&D expenditure that will continue, and we'll probably do one more cycle with Radium Capital, and I think we should be on the home run. But I think, it's silly just to put money into it if you don't absolutely need to. So yeah.
And I might just open that up to everyone actually as well. Like, is now the right time for a lot of businesses to be investing, like I say, time or energy and sort of precious funds into sort of new innovation products, new R&D?
Yeah, just to sort of share some of my thoughts. I think to maintain the status quo is not a winning sort of formula. So we're dealing with complex and fluid times, and we would definitely advocate that people do maintain their R&D intensity, but obviously your capital is precious, so it's really about pointing it towards where you can get the best value and return. And there definitely are opportunities that are available to you, and we've heard from James talking about some of the things that are coming their way. So there are new opportunities available today, and it's just about definitely investing in R&D at the intensity that you can afford, getting your capital structure in place so that you're around today, and most importantly in the near to medium to long term as well.
I'd absolutely endorse what Cameron said. I think at a macro level, Australia is going to come out of this significantly indebted, with lower population growth forecasts because there'll be much less immigration. The only way that we can thrive is if we innovate. It's the only driver. Unless we improve productivity and innovate, we're going to be stuck like a Japan with 20 years of deflation. From a micro level, if you look at the individual firm level, the impact of this on firms across all industries is likely to be the same. Those firms that are genuinely innovative or genuinely different will survive. And whilst the rising tide rises all the boats, when the tide goes out, it doesn't treat every boat equally. So it's important that everyone is positioned, because it's going to be a more difficult environment for the next, for the foreseeable future. So unless you've got something really innovative, a real differentiator through innovation, you've got to ask yourself how you can survive as simply a me-too product.
I really agree with Lauren on the understanding the value of your human capital too. I think obviously you need to, money is the biggest barrier to further R&D investment, and you need to really understand your cash flow and be razor sharp about your staffing ratios relative to your revenue. But a client said to me in the first week, being good to your people is all good and well, but there's no heroism in going broke and providing 0 jobs at the other end. That said, I think keeping the pulse on your human capital, understanding the culture of your organisation, how well people are doing at home or not. We're in a creative business and our people don't do well by themselves. Understanding the headspace and the culture is really important if you want the effects of isolation to be short-lived. I think there's real risk that even as we return to offices and shopping centres, and we're at 10 people now in WA for group outings, making sure that the cultural effect on your business doesn't outlast the isolation is really important. Because innovation is as much about people's motivation to go forth and take risks and do new things and your ability to support it, as it is about your ability to financially invest in that.
I think I'd add also to that, certainly a lot of what we've heard is sharpen your pencil and, bunker down. But it's the simple philosophy of human nature: don't ask, don't get. I mean, the type of opportunities and the amazing economies we've achieved in a lot of businesses have consolidated their spending, have lost key clients, have suddenly new availability in their trials or whatever. We've found enormous savings by simply asking the question, when they provide a quote. And by the way, this is normal practice to any good business, but, they provide a quote, you just say, well, we were also thinking about doing this too. Do you think you could do that as well for the same price? And we've been amazed to see kind of old economy operational capabilities with it, if I call it new economy COVID pricing. So we're getting great efficiencies by simply ask the question. It's free to ask. If you don't get it, you get to continue to decide. There's no harm lost. So whilst I wouldn't call that innovation, I'd call it just good efficiencies in a changing economy. We've been thrilled by the opportunities we're seeing globally.
We love clients like you, James.
Yeah, we squeeze every last dollar on a best endeavour basis. But it's great. I mean, I had one the other day. They wanted $15,000. We got it for $2.5. Couldn't believe it. Doesn't always go that way. We have challenges in other areas, but with the changing landscape, don't ask, don't get. You'd be amazed what can happen.
I think on the flip side of that, as a business that lives and dies on how much money our clients spend with us, we're also happy to do things that maintain our revenue and cut our margins, because keeping bums on seats, frankly, between now and whenever we get to return to the office and things start to normalise is really important. We want our people to be busy. We don't want them sitting at home twiddling their thumbs, because it's not good for their headspace, their heart space, or indeed our revenue. So I think it's about finding the point of mutual best fit for the value equation between businesses and suppliers.
Absolutely.
Awesome. A couple of you have sort of mentioned this already, but I just wanted to talk about sort of some of the biggest barriers to innovation. And I guess I might just ask each of you, what do you see as sort of the biggest barriers here, and how often is that barrier financial? I don't know who wants to say that. Maybe Lauren?
Always first.
Sorry.
I think we're still a startup, and I'm in a different position from the other companies, definitely. But it's just, always financial for us. And I've put a lot of my own money into the company, but that runs out very, very quickly, and I still work on the weekends, and there's only so much you can do as a person kind of physically in trying to keep that money coming in. And that's where companies such as Radium have been helpful. I wish I knew about them a couple of years ago, but I think it's just, again, what I said earlier, being smart about your money. just assessing all your options. And I've learned over the last probably year and a half, there's a lot of things that investors look for, you know, if we're talking about them putting in more money, you know, there's certain things that they don't want to see on the cap table and in the balance sheet. So I've just had to be really aware of that. So yeah, I think definitely financial for me.
Money is a huge one, but I also think time can't be underestimated. We've been really interested to see with our client base, plans that have been kicking around for months or years come together in 2 or 3 weeks, especially on the technology side, owing to there being a bit more time and a bit more necessity. And I think time is a real weapon worth mastering in your business, as is the efficiencies James talked about. You know, we've always talked about the time value of money, but I think we're really now understanding the money value of time, especially with employees being at home. It's become very apparent for a lot of businesses how fast they can really move when they have to.
I'd also add to that, and of course, I think it would resonate a lot with the innovative and interesting companies that are before us now. Innovation is interesting, and with that comes the opportunity of PR, the opportunity of free media, if I call it. I mean, good PR is really free media. We had a great example where we intentionally, by example earlier in the week, did a little test in gonorrhea. Gonorrhea is an STD. It's topical. Everybody gets all overexcited about it. Didn't cost us a lot of money to do it, but the reach by having a indication in that area and the media attention around that. I mean, we had one journalist which said, Bondi backpackers rejoice, gonorrhea cure in the pipeline. You know, just silly kind of innovative, fun stuff. So what that really is taking the innovation. In our case, it's obviously an indicative breakthrough in that area, but using a market communication tool such as good old-fashioned PR didn't cost us much. Well, in fact, cost us nothing on the journalist side, but to actually do the study, it was so inexpensive, and the reach and return on investment we got from that is fairly invaluable. So I think is just thinking a little bit differently, rather than throwing money down a black hole and hoping it gets spat back out. You can do a lot with a little, and brilliantly innovative businesses, particularly Lawrence. I really like Needle Calm. I'm petrified of needles myself, even though we do it all the time as a company. I think there's great opportunity to get a lot of reach with very little capital there.
James, I saw your cheeky PR media with the gonorrhea in Bondi. That was awesome. And to build on some of your points and Lauren's points is the things that we see as barriers to innovation is people getting access to capital, getting access to capital at the right price. So I guess there'd be the founders and innovators that are on this webinar, that some of the anxieties that they have with raising capital is the price of it, and it actually becoming hugely dilutive as well. So, those are the things that we observe as some key barriers.
Cameron, just for a little personal amusement, which I think you might find interesting, I was, post-market, my girlfriend and I were going for a walk, and I was saying, my gonorrhea results are in there. They're fantastic. I'm not sure how I'm going to communicate them. And I can see people walking in my peripheral looking like, my God, talking about my gonorrhea results. So sometimes, as enthusiastic as we can be about these particular things, you've got to be careful how you communicate them, because they can definitely be misconstrued.
Privately shared those sort of results.
We're all human at the end of the day. But no, I don't have gonorrhea, and that was not results on me, just putting it out there.
I think another big barrier to innovation that I touched on earlier is being stuck in who you think your audience is. I think a lot of businesses are super passionate about their innovation or their technical capability or the thing that they're working on, but they've failed to continue to check with people they don't know. Their mum always thinks it's a great idea and their kids are always really proud of them. But I think continuing to check in with audience that you haven't surveyed before or haven't asked and don't have a vested interest in making you feel good is really important to make sure you understand who your market is and how it's shifting beneath you, especially at a rapidly changing time like this. I think thinking about, and a good way to reframe it is to think about, what if we only served our most vulnerable customers? Or what if we only served our most self-sufficient customers? Or what if we only served our most creative customers, how might they use our technology? And I think, and especially in a business like Brett's, thinking about the aged care sector with touchless technology, touchless home automation is a really great way to think about what other applications this might go to. I think it's a great example of how to extend your existing capability by thinking about new markets.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are good points. I mean, I'd sort of extend those a bit. I think a barrier for us is really understanding who the right customer is. And I know that last year I spent a great deal of time with the major builders, the Lend-Lease, Mirvacs and so forth. In reality, we're never going to be very successful with them until we're a lot bigger. And looking back on it, have realized that one of the most important decisions for me was saying, who are the businesses that are really customers that are really likely to value what we've got? And it turns out to be the mid-range, more innovative builders that really want to differentiate themselves from the big players.
Yeah. And
if I can just pick up the point that you made, Melanie, in our business, that constantly checking whether you're right or not, very much with a buy versus build decision. So our product is hardware, firmware, cloud, software, and in every part of that ecosystem, we have a choice of taking something that's been developed that will be initially a lot cheaper, but long-term might be more expensive, or building something from scratch. And what we've had to do is to make some hard decisions about things that we'd like to develop and decide, no, let's just take something that's already working and use that because it's going to be a lot quicker and easier to get to.
As sexy as it is to us, as excited as we are about the technology, does anybody ultimately care at the end of the day, and are they going to pay for it?
Otherwise, and for us, I think in general, hardware tends to get a lot cheaper over time. The real value in any sort of technology business is likely to be around the AI and the software. So for us, it's about what are the decisions that we need to make on the hardware in order to get to that really valuable software platform or that really valuable AI platform.
Awesome. That was all super interesting, although I did not expect this conversation to go down the gonorrhea route at any point. But
sorry about that.
So just before we move on to answer some audience questions, just one more final one for me, and I'll just ask you each to answer sort of fairly succinctly, if possible. For sort of anyone who is watching this or listening to this, who sort of feels like they could really benefit from, making a pivot or changing something or, innovating in some way, and they perhaps have a really great idea, but they're not quite sure how to get started, or if they're facing that financial challenge, what's sort of the one piece of advice that you would offer them to sort of get them off the mark? And I won't pick on you this time, Lauren. I'll go to...
Oh, I have an answer. I'm ready.
Oh, okay. Lauren, you're up.
Yeah, so this is probably more aimed at people who are probably just starting out rather than established companies. But one thing I have noticed with a lot of startups that I've met with and observed over the past few years, that especially in the medical space, they're not from a medical background, and the practical, like the idea itself is great, but putting it into practice is very difficult. And it's just, I don't think sometimes they've spoken to the people that they need to speak to. As a rule now, I just recommend to people, if you've got something like that, trying to speak to at least 10 people before you kind of get it off the ground, especially in the medical field. That was probably my big question, because I'm saying this because I've watched a lot of startups who are struggling at the moment and probably will not make it to the end of the year. So, and they have invested a lot of time and money into it, and got a few team members on board. So that's my little bit of advice.
And I think I'd My advice was exactly the same, Lauren. I've done work with CSIRO, just mentoring, some of their startups. And one of the things that's very powerful that they do is that they really emphasize that individuals worry too much about having their ideas stolen.
Oh, absolutely.
And too little about whether there's going to be customer demand. And they actually try and make individuals with great ideas speak to 100 customers.
Yeah.
And then come back. So you can never speak to enough customers. That would be my recommendation, even at that very early stage.
Absolutely.
Totally agree.
James, do you want to jump in on this one?
Oh, yeah, no, certainly. I think within reason, back yourself, or at least have a go and do back yourself. I can, when it comes to innovation, I distinctly remember, might not have been last year, but the year before at the World Superbug Congress I mentioned earlier, we have the first new class of antibiotic in over 30 years, and we're surrounded by many other companies there that have been doing the same thing, expecting a different answer, and really not getting anywhere as a business with their old world technology. And you stand in that room and you speak to those people and they look at you like you've got two heads and you're from another planet, and they just don't like you. And 12 months on, that person particularly I can think of, they had $1 billion market cap at the time. We thought they were weird. They thought we were weird. And now their company's worth $3 million because that crappy technology that expected a different result without innovation, without changing things, failed. And now, obviously, we return this year where we are giving the opening R&D address globally as the sign of new hope in the fight against antibiotics or superbugs. So the point there really being is, yes, it can be deflating when these experts tell you that you don't know what you're doing and you're nuts. And sometimes they're right, don't get me wrong, but sometimes you just got to have a go. And if it doesn't make sense along the way, continue to self-assess and, to really have a bit of a litmus test whether you're right or wrong. And you might actually find you're right, and that there's something really behind that idea worth investigating. And it's a great feeling if or when that ever happens, but at one time or another through life, I think it does. And give it a go.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why it's really important in your customer testing that you're testing more than riffing an idea. Like, we're a huge fan of testing fast and dirty, but testing something tangible. You've got to test it. We call it dirty prototyping, like paper apps, Keynote websites, tape and glue models, like build it out of a cardboard roll, do whatever you got to do, but you got to show people something. Like, if you think about where Apple came from, nobody thought Steve Jobs had a good idea except Steve Jobs, so he backed himself. But he also put together dirty prototypes that he showed people, and they were like, actually, I do want that. But you've got to show people something. So it's a balance of the two. It's a balance of really making sure you do have a market, but being able to, back yourself and prove that there is genuine innovation in your idea. I think that's really important. And
close enough is good enough. I think a lot of people try to perfect, and then they get to the finally showing those opinion leaders or whatever, and they go, this stuff sucks. What are you doing? You've been wasting all your time. Whereas if you just had a proof of concept and you're able to get that quick early opinion, whether you're down the right path or not.
Totally agree. With product and service design, we make clients watch Play School. Like, what they can't make with a toilet roll can't be done. Like, get into your gut headspace and figure out how to prove it using cheap, fast, disposable materials rather than go and buy yourself a 3D printer.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. The other advice I give people in this time is don't see COVID as a marketing opportunity. It is a context in which you can better serve your customers through a genuine time of need, but you need to be following your own business purpose rather than trying to harness a market gap and wedge your product through it, because this time will end and you'll be left with something that nobody wants and you don't want either. So I think while this is the worst thing that's collectively happened to business in a while, it may not be the worst thing that happens to your business if you get it wrong. So see it as context rather than reason.
And I would add one other thought in that I think a lot of people feel the single Steve Jobs genius in terms of startup businesses. Most businesses are started up by teams. So if you've got a great idea, get somebody who you trust to work with you on it rather than trying to do everything yourself.
And that one for a reason.
When it comes to applying to a government accelerator, when it comes to looking at funding, nobody wants to put a lot of money into individuals. They want to put money into teams because it's too risky.
I second that. I've been a one-man band for a long time. It's definitely been brought up. Yeah, every discussion.
And Brett, just building on your ideas around the getting access to government grants, the thing that we really advocate is just familiarise yourself with all the various government initiatives that are out there. There's some fantastic grants. The R&D grant is obviously a space that we're very familiar with. You should be absolutely familiarising and getting close to understanding those programs. And in addition, really begin to understand the alternative forms of capital that are available to you. And of course, our bias, our strong bias is towards R&D finance, but it's just another way of injecting capital into you. That is certain and it is non-dilutionary. So again, we just emphasise, get familiar with the various government initiatives that are out there and look at alternative sources of capital that can just keep your R&D intensity up and running so that you can punch through this event and get to the other side in good shape.
Yeah, I think it's an obvious point, but it's just worthwhile reinforcing. From the perspective of an investor, there's an old saying which is you make your money going in, not coming out. So there are lots of professional investors around, lots of VCs, lots of people who are looking for opportunities to buy cheap. So the longer that you can bootstrap, the longer that you can rely on alternative sources of funding rather than giving away your equity, the more you're in a position to get a genuinely good deal rather than have somebody come in when you're desperate. So try and keep away from giving up equity for as long as you can, because there are a bunch of people, as I said, who make their money going in and buying cheap.
If I may pose a question, and I'm sure in due course we'll all get the chance, but has anybody of these companies here received a government grant?
Yes.
Yeah, what may I ask related to that? Because and I bring it up because a lot of people, so often when I speak to people in the public, get a government grant, waste really hard.
Yeah, they're a lot of effort. I just have this approach now where I book out an hour every Thursday morning. I scour the internet for grants and awards, and I just apply for it if I'm eligible. There's no harm done. I think we've only got the MVP grant, and it was a lot of work, but it's money at the end of the day. And I think if you have the time, just do it. I think it's worth it.
Thanks. So any other businesses here got any success with grants?
Yeah, so we went on an Austrade program to the US last year, so that was funded, and some of the expenses that weren't funded we get rebated. So not a grant per se, but a government paid for program. Exactly.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing. I think the best government money is the R&D rebate or EMDG that we're steadily moving into, and it may be more applicable to the other businesses here. But I personally have a bit of an adversity to the whole, government grant thing. I've found to try to get, that sweet government non-dilutionary grant that all the universities seem to get, nobody else manages to touch it. It can be a lot of time that may be better spent in other areas, and enjoy that R&D rebate. It's there to support innovation, and I think is a wonderful facilitator to business as a whole.
Great. We've just got 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to move on to some of the questions from the audience. This first one is, I think it's just for everyone, but again, if you can kind of answer swiftly. From personal experience, what advice would you offer to smaller B2B businesses who want to engage with their own customers at this time? Maybe Mel, do you want to
Sorry, was the question, how should they engage with their customers?
Yeah, what advice would you give them?
Call them, have a chat, like get your CEO on the phone and ring them and tell them that they're important to you and ask them how they're going. I think it's important to regard your business-to-business customers as people, and it's even more evident when their child or their husband wanders into the back of the shop. We're all getting a nice little window into people's real homes and real lives at the moment. So my advice is to make the most of that and make sure you know them personally, because I think relationships are built in crisis, and this is a crisis.
Yeah.
True. Yeah, absolutely. But I'm just noticing just the simple fact, to your point, Mel, of just picking up the phone and talking to your customers consistently is reassuring, building a relationship, and there's a byproduct of obviously generating business immediately and the near term as well.
I think it's tempting to survey, but I would say there is a lot of free COVID pulse surveys going on in the marketplace at the moment. There's a lot of omnibuses in field. Ring your favourite market researcher and ask if they can share one with you. I wouldn't personally invest in that at the moment, or do more than buy a question in an existing omnibus. If you want kind of a pulse taker, you're much better off spending that time investing in the relationships and finding out how their business is going.
I'd sort of add to that by saying, paradoxically, the fact that so many people are working from home makes them easier to contact. So I've certainly found that you phone on the whim and you just find they answer the phone, because what else are they? But I absolutely agree. If you're in the B2B business, your customers are going to be struggling like you are, and be genuinely understanding what their issues are and whether you can solve them is the best thing you can do.
Mm-hmm. There's another question around sort of why innovation is worth investing in when you're struggling with cash flow. Like, can you sort of pinpoint why it's so important?
Well,
I don't. Sorry, go ahead, Cameron.
I was just going to say the alternative of doing nothing is not really a winning strategy. And I think it's a very fluid, complex time, and you need to be working out what your R&D or innovation looks like. And it might be small or it might be large, but you need to have some form of intelligent response to these complex times. So I don't think there's much alternative. Sorry,
I think, as I said earlier, with a lower growth environment and indeed a recession with significant government debt, we are facing a much tougher environment for all companies. Those companies that are going to succeed are the ones that have got some genuine differentiator. That's why you have to invest.
And I think investing as well comes in two forms. There's investing through the traditional throw a bit of money at it and hope it gets better, but there's investing through human capital. You know, do something slightly differently, find efficiencies in the business, you know, deploy new programs, consolidate existing programs. That there's, you know, to the point of, if your cash flow is tanking and your business isn't performing, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at the thing, it's still going to go down that same path. You have to therefore change. And there's a lot of great examples of some businesses, I think it's quite a wanky word, but have pivoted from their primary focus to a new focus and have created either a wonderful wholly owned subsidiary or a new chapter of employment and opportunity as a result. Investing, you know, money's easy. Invest through smart capital, which is thinking differently and approaching a problem that can also be a huge opportunity.
An example for our own business, we do a lot of face-to-face collaboration, a lot of workshopping, a lot of, you know, co-creation and co-design. And we've always done that face-to-face, which is geographically limiting, obviously. We've moved all of that online using tools like Miro and Zoom in this time, and it's taken us kind of 2 weeks to get that product off the market. But what we've now got, being in Perth, in the world's, you know, where 60% of the world's population lives in our time zone, is unrestricted geographic access now to Singapore, China and beyond using those tools. So what has realistically taken up, we've been talking about for 2 years, has taken us 2 weeks to create. It'll take us another 2 years to perfect, but now gives us access to new markets, which we previously wouldn't have touched.
Yeah. I'm just gonna, I know it's 12:59, but I'm just gonna ask you this one final question, which is, we've been talking a lot about sort of how to innovate and how to sort of overcome some of those barriers, but how important is it to sort of understand like you've talked about understanding your customers, but also understanding the landscape, the sector that you're in, and sort of the problem that you're solving? Like, would you warn against sort of innovating for innovation's sake? What do you need to do before you get cracking?
Mel, you'd be best positioned to answer this.
I think you've got to have a genuine passion for what you're doing. You've got to believe in it, and you've got to understand your customer base. But if you're not doing your due diligence on A, your financials, obviously, and B, your marketplace, you're going to miss a trick. There's a lot of Me Too out there. And then I think, you know, Brett's point about using what's existing and leveraging it rather than starting from scratch is really important too. If somebody else is doing a good job, how can you augment that market offer and add to it rather than start again from the basement? Because it's really expensive and the marketplace won't support it.
Yeah, what I'd say is a lot of the techniques that you see people use is start with what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And if I look at it from our business, one of the big problems when I talked about complexity and cost at the beginning is the fact for most of the automation players in the market, it takes an electrician an hour to install a standard switch and then program it. And that's $70 an hour for an electrician, whereas it would take him 15 minutes to install a standard non-start switch. So when you look at complexity, you've got to look at the total cost, which for us is the cost of installing those products. It's not necessarily the cost and complexity for the end user. It's actually mass deployment is not taking place because the big builders see it as being too expensive and not adding enough value to the home. So we've spent a lot of time trying to understand that value chain. What does an electrician do? What does a specifier do in order to say, how do we make that so that it takes you 15 minutes rather than an hour? And all of those costs and complexities is done in the cloud without any need for human intervention on site. So I would say absolutely innovation. Start with your problem statement, even if you don't quite know what the answer is.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, that's pretty much all we've got time for. Sorry, we overran a little bit. For all the participants, we will be sharing a video of this with everyone who registered. And like I said at the beginning, that we will sort of offer a contact email so you can reach out with more questions for any of the panelists. And thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you sort of taking this hour out to talk us through that. It was really fascinating for me. I hope it was valuable for everyone on the line as well.
Thank you, Steph.
Thanks, Steph.
Yeah, been great sharing.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks.
Bye.